Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. I've always felt a little bad for Thor the Dark World, which is goofy. I realize that. There's no reason to feel sorry for a mediocre $170 million superhero movie. We're not exactly talking about an orphan from a Charles Dickens novel here. But whenever I watch this movie, which is not very often, I realize that I'd completely forgotten about the post-credits stinger at the end, which teases the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, released a year after Dark World. I don't love this scene. Like, as far as Marvel post-credit scenes go, it's very middle of the road, but it is a huge reminder that the cosmic side of the MCU was about to change in a huge way, and in a direction that would blow Dark World out of the water. These days, it feels like the second Thor film has become the go-to movie online when someone describes a bland, bog-standard Marvel movie. The one to avoid being like at all costs, because apparently there's nothing worse than being similar to Thor the Dark World. I don't think the movie is quite as bad as its reputation would suggest, honestly, but I definitely understand the criticisms. It's a movie that magnified a lot of the usual problems the MCU has, while bringing very little new or of substance to the table. For people who really dislike Marvel movies, this is exactly the kind of film they can point to. So today, I want to take a dive into what went wrong, why Thor the Dark World is seen as the low point of the franchise, and all the scrambling behind the scenes for creative control. But to do that, we're gonna have to go back to the distant, faraway year of 2011.
Surprised you actually knew who that was. To give back to the community.
Thor was the fourth movie released in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And though I definitely put it above the almost complete misfire that was The Incredible Hulk, it doesn't exactly stand out. Director Kenneth Branagh's film, in my opinion, did a great job of casting lead characters like Thor and Loki, which by the way definitely isn't nothing. I mean, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston were relatively unknown at the time, but the screenplay is as superhero movie 101 as they come, and Natalie Portman was totally wasted in the Jane Foster role. Still, Thor was mostly politely received critically and at the box office, and it became very clear early on that Marvel wanted a sequel, and quickly, as the studio announced the film would be out less than 2 years after the first one. That was a problem for Kenneth Branagh, who had just devoted years to Thor. The prospect of turning around and immediately making another one with even less production time wasn't exactly enticing. So he declined the offer to return and moved on to his next film, the really terrible Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit. This left Kevin Feige and company in a tough spot, and in desperate need of a new director. So they looked at a lot of TV talent, especially people who directed impressive episodes of prestige shows like Dexter and Game of Thrones. When that didn't work out, they got very close to signing Cabin in the Woods director Drew Goddard, who opted for a big Sinister Six project at Sony that never actually worked out because, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a thing. So those talks fell through. Finally, Marvel looked to Patty Jenkins, who had directed the Oscar-winning crime drama Monster in 2003. Jenkins came into the project with very high ambitions. After spending most of the last decade directing for shows like Arrested Development and The Killing, she was more than ready to jump back into the world of films, and came in with a very specific vision for what her version of the movie would be. Jenkins wanted her Thor 2 to be a Romeo and Juliet-inspired space opera, and it would have seen Jane stuck on Earth and Thor being ordered to stay in Asgard by Odin. Malekith was still involved, but her film would have focused much more on Jane and Thor's star-crossed love, as well as Thor's troubled relationship with his father. Marvel initially agreed, even delaying the film by a few months so they would have time to work on the new angle. But as scripts began to be written, it was becoming clear to Jenkins that the studio's vision of the movie and her own weren't exactly on the same page. Apparently, the actual screenplay didn't have the mythic and romantic elements that Jenkins had pitched, at least not to the extent that she wanted them. And after reading the final script that Marvel was dead set on going with, she decided to drop out of the project entirely. So once again, Dark World was hurtling towards a release date without a director in sight. And this time, it was even worse, as losing Jenkins apparently had its leads pretty unhappy with Marvel. Hemsworth has said that he thought the movie's production felt very unfocused, but Natalie Portman in particular was not happy about Jenkins' departure. She had loved and championed the director's pitch, which had promised a much deeper and more nuanced take on Jane Foster than she had received in the first Thor, and the thankless, boring dialogue the character was receiving in current drafts of the script. But in the end, she didn't really have a choice other than to go along with it. She had signed an overall deal with Marvel Studios, so she was stuck playing Foster whether she was happy with the material or not.
In America goes a sheer far and fast. Thor's hammer makes thunder and lightning crash, and the whole kit's hard with a big hole smash.
While The Dark World's pre-production wasn't exactly going great after Patty Jenkins left, many thought Marvel had righted the ship by hiring Alan Taylor. And it made sense. Taylor was a legendary TV director, having been behind the camera for some of the best episodes of The Sopranos. And maybe even more importantly, he had proved that he could manage shooting a massive epic by directing some of the best episodes of the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. And apparently he was fine with going with the script they preferred. But the project was still missing a villain. The character of Malekith wasn't exactly the role of a lifetime, and Marvel was having a hard time finding a name actor eager to sit through hours of dark elf makeup for it. Kevin Feige and company were apparently really desperate to land Danish actor and 007 ballbuster Mads Mikkelsen. There was just one problem. Mikkelsen had just been offered the part of Hannibal Lecter in Bryan Fuller's new TV series Hannibal, and understandably, he decided to sign on to the NBC show instead. Enter Christopher Eccleston. The former Doctor Who lead and future Leftovers star was well respected in the industry, but he wasn't exactly known as a blockbuster guy. The actor would later go on to admit that he signed on to The Dark World and another blockbuster G.I. Joe Rise of the Cobra purely for the paycheck. In a surprisingly honest interview well after the movie came out, he even said, "Working on something like G.I. Joe was horrendous. I just wanted to cut my throat every day. And Thor, just gun to your mouth. Gone in 60 Seconds was a good experience, but G.I. Joe and Thor were... I really paid for being a whore those times." So, yeah, it's probably safe to say that Malekith won't be back for a cameo anytime soon.
Wow. Experience the powers of Thor.
Setting aside the fact that a lot of its stars seem to be pretty miserable while making it, Dark World's production seemed to be going smoothly. Alan Taylor has even said that he felt Marvel executives mostly left him alone during the shoot, which he appreciated. But during post-production, that changed in a big way. Now, this is where things get very vague because we don't completely know Kevin Feige's reasoning here, but it seems that the movie was really taken away from Taylor in the editing room, and from the looks of things, it seems they weren't entirely happy with what they had, especially when it came to Loki. The character had grown into a fan favorite in the years since the first Thor, and I guess producers believed Dark World really underused him, so they called in Joss Whedon, who was deep into late game production on the Avengers, and asked for help. And Whedon really got to it, writing or rewriting nearly every Loki scene in the movie. Now look, obviously the plan of calling in Joss Whedon to work on your movie at the last minute doesn't always pay off, but I do think the Loki stuff shines in Dark World, and it did kind of emerge as the most enjoyable aspect of the film, at least for me. So it's kind of hard to blame Marvel for bringing him in here. Still, when the movie was all said and done and you watch it now, I think it looks like exactly what it is. A film made by and starring a lot of talented people who had no real passion for it, existing only because the Marvel release schedule said a Thor movie was coming in 2013. And the movie it teases in that post-credits scene, Guardians of the Galaxy, may not be a perfect film, but the difference between the two could not be more obvious. One was made out of pure obligation, while the other feels like a passion project. Now, I have no idea how Patty Jenkins' Thor 2 would have turned out, or if it would be better or worse than the superhero movie she would go on to make, Wonder Woman. But I do think it's a little sad that we were robbed of a director who was actually passionate about the pitch that she had. Thor: The Dark World feels like a movie no one was driven to make, but thankfully this story kind of has a happy ending. As Thor Ragnarok, I don't think suffers from that problem at all. So at the end of the day, maybe the Dark World is just what this franchise needed, for Marvel to wake up and see they needed to bring in something new and fresh. Okay, if researching and looking up stuff for this video has taught me anything, it's that there's a lot of shady websites out there, and you can always use more security. That's where Dashlane comes in. Dashlane is a great service that protects you against hacking and phishing scams, and a huge part of that is how it keeps your passwords securely backed up and easy to access on every device you own. So it's not just secure, it's easy to use too. If you're anything like me, you probably do a lot of your financial stuff online. Shopping, paying for Spotify, banking, all that good stuff. Dashlane makes this way safer because you'll never have to save your private information in an unsecured browser or with a merchant again, giving you way more control of your online identity. Another massive advantage is that Dashlane logs you in automatically. And if that worries you, don't freak out, because it creates unique passwords for every site and encrypts them, so a breach in one could never affect the others. You can sign up and get Dashlane for free on iOS, Android, or the desktop version. And you can also get a 30-day free trial of its premium features, which includes a ton of useful stuff: secure account backup, the ability to sync among all your devices, secure password sharing, and more. So to check it out, go to the link dashlane.com/midnight in the video description or pinned comment below, and get 10% off the premium features by using promo code MIDNIGHT.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.